to discuss about fibroid uterus. So let's get started. So fibroid uterus, there are different names given to fibroid uterus. It is also called as leiomyoma, fibromyoma, myofibroma, leiomyofibroma. So there are different names given to a single condition. And it is the most common benign tumor of the female genital tract, and hence is the most frequent indication for the removal of the uterus, that is hysterectomy. The incidence of fibroid uterus is around 20 to 40% in reproductive aged women, and its highest incidence is seen in the age group of 35 to 45 years. So by definition, fibroids are the benign monoclonal tumors arising from the smooth muscle cells and fibroblast of the myometrium, and it comprises mainly of the smooth muscle cells and varying amount of fibrous connective tissues. So the exact etiology of fibroid is not still clear. However, it is a monoclonal in origin, that is, it arises from a single cell, and recently different genetic, hormonal, and various growth factors have been implicated in the etiology of fibroid. So regarding genetics, it is found that 40% of fibroid cases are associated with varying types of this chromosomal abnormalities like trisomy 12, translocation between chromosomes 12 and 14, deletion of chromosome 7. Especially these large and atypical fibroids are most likely to show chromosomal abnormalities. Regarding the hormonal factors, estrogen and progesterone both are implicated in the growth of fibroid, and this is evidenced by the fact that it is rarely detected before puberty, and it usually regresses after menopause, and it is more prevalent during the reproductive age group. The estrogen receptors are higher in concentration of fibroid cells, and there is increased incidence in obesity, as in obesity there is increased conversion of this androgens into estrogen, peripheral conversion into estrogen, and early menarche and late menopause. So there is an increased lifetime exposure to estrogen in these conditions. So the incidence of fibroid uterus is more in these cases. Growth factors like transforming growth factor beta, epidermal growth factor, platelet-derived growth factor, and insulin growth factors are also found to be overexpressed in fibroid, and these growth factors are found to promote smooth muscle cell proliferation and synthesis of extracellular matrix. So going through the risk factors, the risk factors of fibroid uterus include race, that is ethnicity. Especially African American women are more likely to develop the risks of development of fibroid uterus is around 2 to 3 times more in African American women than as compared to the Caucasians. Age, as we have already discussed, that in age group, in the reproductive age group, this fibroid uterus is more prevalent, and it regresses after menopause. Exposure to endogenous hormonal factors and family history. So if there is a family history of fibroid uterus, there is a risk 2.5 times increased risk of developing a fibroid in that female. Similarly, obesity also increases the risk of fibroid uterus. In diet, if patients consuming large amount of green leafy vegetables, they have shown that the incidence of fibroid is less. Oral contraceptives have not been shown to have any effect on fibroid uterus, and smoking, as there is decreased level of estrogen in patients who are smoker, the incidence of fibroid is less in smokers. So this is a table showing the how these risk factors affect the growth of the fibroid. So reproductive age group, endogenous exposure to endogenous hormone, family history, and African-American race and obese have increased risks for developing fibroid, whereas patient consuming green vegetables, those who are on regular exercise with increasing parity, and those who are smokers are found to have decreased incidence of fibroid uterus. And there is no effect of ossicles on development of fibroid. So let's see how fibroid uterus is classified. So depending on the site of origin, it is classified as either a corporeal fibroid, that is the fibroid which is present on the corpus or body of the uterus, and most of the fibroids are corporeal fibroid, that is around 97% are present in the body of the uterus, and those present in the cervical region are known as cervical fibroids. So this is the classification depending on the site of the fibroid, and in relation to the uterine wall, the fibroid is classified as either submucosal, intramural, or subserosal fibroid. So submucosal fibroid is that which is protruding inside the uterine cavity, that is the mucosal layer of the uterine cavity, and intramural fibroid is that is present within the myometrium, and subserosal is the fibroid which is projecting towards the serosal layer or into the abdominal cavity. It's called subserosal fibroid. So recently, International Federation of Obstetrics and Gynecology have formulated a new subclassification of fibroid uterus, and depending on the amount of fibroid that is projecting into or out of the myometrium, they have classified the fibroid. So JERO, and they have numbered this classification system. There is a numbering system. So JERO is pedunculated intracavitary. So this is JERO. So it is pedunculated with pedicle, and it is projecting whole of the fibroid masses projected inside the uterine cavity. This is numbered as JERO. One is that submucosal fibroid, where more than 50% is submucosal or less than 50% is intramural into the myometrium. Number two is more than 50% of the fibroid is intramural, and some amount of fibroid mass is projecting into the endometrial cavity. Number four is whole of the fibroid, that is myoma. It is within the, three is that the most of the portion of fibroid is intramural, but there is a contact of the endometrium with the fibroid tissue. And four is all of the fibroid tissue is within the myometrium. Five is subserosal, where more than 50% is intramural, and six is subserosal, but less than 50% is intramural. Seven is subserosal pedunculated, just as JERO. There is a pedicle which is hanging from the serosal layer, and the whole myoma tissue is outside into the abdominal cavity. And number eight is others that can be either cervical or parasitic fibroid. Parasitic fibroid is when this subserosal fibroid it gets extended, pedunculated subserosal fibroid, and it detaches from the uterine wall, so it will roam around in the abdominal cavity. That is called wandering fibroid or parasitic fibroid. So this is the same slide. So in fibroid, there are different changes that occurs within the fibroid tissue. The most common change that occurs in the fibroid tissue is the degenerative change. And among that degenerative change, hyaline degeneration is the most common. And this hyaline degeneration, the commonest site of the fibroid tissue where hyaline degeneration occurs is the central portion where there is least blood supply. And on cut section, when there is hyaline degeneration, the whole appearance of the fibroid will be disappeared. So when in this hyaline degeneration, there is liquefaction, cystic degeneration occurs. And when there is deposition of calcium carbonate or phosphate calcification can occur. Deposition of fat globules causes development of this fatty degeneration, and this red degeneration, it is a specific type of degeneration that occurs during pregnancy, especially in the second half of the pregnancy. And this is due to the ischemic necrosis of the central portion of the fibroid tissue. In this case, the patient usually presents with fever, myalgia, and on investigation, there will be leukocytosis. Usually this such degeneration, red degeneration, is usually managed conservatively with analgesics and antipyretics and rest. So this red degeneration is important. It can also come in short notes in your exam papers, theory paper. Other changes that occurs within the fibroid tissue is infection, especially in cervical fibroid and submucous fibroid polyp. The submucous fibroid, which has protruded outside the vaginal canal, can get infected. Atrophy, the atrophy, it usually occurs after menopause due to the decline in the hormonal level, that is the level of estrogen. And other changes are necrosis, vascular changes. Rarely, very rarely, there is a change of sarcomatous changes can occur within the fibroid tissue. So going through the symptoms, most of the fibroids, nearly 50% fibroids are asymptomatic, and they are usually diagnosed incidentally while investigating for other problems, and around 50% are symptomatic. So the symptoms of fibroid can be broadly classified as into three headings. These are abnormal uterine bleeding, pelvic pressure and pain, and reproductive dysfunction. So we'll go through each symptoms elaborately, and this is very important from the point of your examination, even in theory paper as well as in practical paper. This is very important. So abnormal uterine bleeding, how the patient presents is, most of the patients, they present with heavy and prolonged menstrual flow, that is menorrhagia, and usually submucous and intramural varieties are more symptomatic. Submucous are most symptomatic with abnormal uterine bleeding. The abnormal uterine bleeding or heavy flow during menstruation are due to increased surface area of the endometrium that is caused by the fibroid, interference with normal uterine contractility, congestion and dilatation of the endometrial venous plexus. And there is evidence that due to within the fibroid tissue, because the receptors of estrogens are more in the fibroid cells, there is a local hyperestrogenism that will result in focal endometrial hyperplasia of the fibroid layer. That will also result in heavy and prolonged flow. The other causes may be pelvic congestion and imbalance between thromboxane A2 and prostacyclins. So the level of thromboxane will be less, as this is a vasoconstrictor, and prostacyclins are vasodilators. So the level of prostacyclin will be raised and thromboxane will be decreased in cases of fibroids. So that will also result in abnormal uterine bleeding. Other patterns of abnormal bleeding that the patient may present are irregular menstrual bleeding or intermenstrual bleeding, especially in cases of submucous variety. And patient may also complain of frequent menstruation or polymenorrhea. Sometimes postmenopausal women can also present with postmenopausal bleeding. So in fibroid, the patient may complain varieties of different types of pain in relation to menstruation, duration, and onset of pain. So most of the patients with fibroid uterus, they complain of dysmenorrhea, that is pain during menstruation, and it can be either congestive or spasmodic dysmenorrhea. And intramural fibroids, most of them present with congestive dysmenorrhea, and spasmodic variety is more common in submucous variety of fibroid. Sometimes patient may present with acute pain if there is torsion of the subserosal fibroid or hemorrhage within the fibroid tissue. And as I've already discussed, in red degeneration during pregnancy, patient will present with severe pain. The fibroid uterus may also present with chronic pelvic pain if it is associated with other conditions like endometriosis, adenomyosis, and pelvic inflammatory disease. And in rapidly growing sarcoma also, the patient presents with pain. So the pressure symptoms that the fibroid will develop will show that the patient with present will depend on the pressure on the tissue or the organ where the pressure has developed. So if there is a pressure on urinary bladder, the patient may present with urgency, frequency, and dysuria. If the patient has a pressure on rectum, the C may present with constipation. Pressure on the bladder, neck, and urethra usually land up in emergency department with retention of urine, acute retention of urine. And pressure on the side walls may present with hydroureter and hydronephrosis. This is finding in ultrasonography. And sometimes the pressure may be so large or long-standing pressure of the on the ureter and the kidneys. The patient may have gross hydronephrosis and non-functioning kidney also. The reproductive dysfunctions that the fibroid causes is loss of fertility or infertility. In 30% of cases of fibroid, the infertility, there might be, patient may present with infertility. This is mainly due to distortion of the cavity, pelvic inflammatory disease, association with endometriosis, and anovulation. The fertility rate usually decreases in submucous and intramural type, whereas subserosal type have no effect on the fertility rate. Patients sometimes may complain of dyspareunia also. This might be due to enlarged size and association with endometriosis and PID. The other symptoms that the patient may present with is the abdominal lump. Patient sometimes, when there is a huge enlargement of the uterus due to fibroid, the uterus might be palpable to the patient herself, and usually the uterus is palpable when it is more than 12 weeks size. And sometimes patient presents with the vaginal discharge, blood mixed vaginal discharge in cases of infected submucous fibroid polyp and cervical fibroid. So on examination, because of heavy menstrual bleeding, patient may have pallor. On abdominal examination, if the size of the uterus is large enough, that is more than 12 weeks of size, we can feel the mass. It is usually firm and nodular and arising from the pelvis, where the lower limit cannot be reached. And it is relatively well defined, mobile from side to side. The mass can be moved from side to side with restricted mobility from above downwards. As it is arising from the uterus, we cannot move the mass from above downwards, which is more seen in ovarian tissue. So in ovarian mass, the mass can be palpable, can be moved from side to side as well as from above downwards. So this is one of the differentiating feature, where a feature which we can keep in our mind, whether the mass has arise from the ovarian mass is ovarian origin or from uterine origin. And usually these are non-tender and dull on percussion. On first speculum examination, in such big fibroid, the cervix is usually pulled up. And if it is a cervical fibroid or submucous fibroid polyp that has protruded inside the vaginal canal, we can also see the fibroid itself protruding through the external os. On bimanual pelvic examination, it reveals irregularly enlarged uterus. As this is one of the differentiating point from adenomyosis. In adenomyosis, the uterus is uniformly enlarged, whereas in fibroid, it is irregularly enlarged. If uterus is not felt separately from the swelling, and as such a groove is not felt in between the uterus and the mass. So if it is ovarian in origin, we can feel a groove between uterine mass and the uterus and the ovarian mass. But as this fibroid is, it arises from the uterus itself, that group is not present, except in case of pedunculated subserosal fibroid. The cervix moves with the movement of the tumor felt for abdomen. So diagnosis is mainly from history and examination, and to confirm our diagnosis, we can do imaging studies. So ultrasonography is the first line of imaging modality for the diagnosis of fibroid uterus, where we can see well-defined hypoechoic lesions. There might be peripheral calcification with distal shadowing in cases of old fibroids. The ultrasonography, it can be done by either transabdominal route or transvaginal route, and it not only in the confirmation of diagnosis, it also helps in the measurement of the size, location, and number of fibroids, and also differentiates the tumor from this fibroid from other masses such as ovarian or adnexal masses. So another imaging modality that can help further help in confirmation of diagnosis is saline infusion sonography. So what happens, what we do in saline infusion sonography is we insert a catheter inside the uterine cavity and distend the uterine cavity with normal saline, and we do ultrasonography either through transabdominal or transvaginal route. So in this figure, the uterine cavity is distended with this black shadow, that is water or normal saline, and we can see a mass. So this saline infusion sonography, it helps in the evaluation of soft mucosal and intracavitary fibroid, and it helps in differentiating the fibroid from other endometrial pathology like mucosal polyps, thickened endometrium, or sometimes it can only be blood clot. So for further confirming the intracavitary or soft mucosal fibroid, saline infusion sonography is helpful. The most accurate imaging modality for the diagnosis of fibroid is MRI, magnetic resonance imaging. It does precise fibroid mapping. So what does this fibroid mapping is? It confirms the location, measurement, and character of that fibroid tissue, and it can detect all the fibroid tissue very accurately and can detect very small fibroid as well. It also differentiates fibroid from focal adenomyosis and other adnexal pathologies. And when this MRI is enhanced with gadolinium, it also helps in assessing the vascularity of the fibroid. So another investigation that can be done for fibroid uterus, especially in submucous type of fibroid uterus, is hysteroscopy. During hysteroscopy, what we do is we insert an endoscopic device into the uterine cavity, and we distend the uterine cavity with saline, and we can visualize the entire endometrial cavity. So we can the submucous type variety of fibroid uterus can be diagnosed by this investigation, and it has the advantage of being diagnostic as well as therapeutic at the same setting. So these are the differential diagnoses of fibroid uterus: pregnancy, hematometra, adenomyosis, bicoordinate uterus, ovarian cyst or tumors, ectopic pregnancies, pelvic, kidney, and chronic inversion. These are the differential diagnoses. So going through the management of fibroid uterus, first we have to do the routine investigations that are the imaging modalities for the diagnosis. Sometimes other investigations may also be needed, like if there is a gross hydronephrosis. So to know whether the kidney is functioning or not, we might be needing to do intravenous pyelogram or CT urogram, and sometimes diagnostic laparoscopy may also be needed. And the definitive management of this fibroid uterus, it depends on the age of the patient, whether the family has been completed or not, severity of the symptoms, size and location of the fibroid, desire of the patient to preserve fertility, and availability of the treatment modality or expertise of the caregiver present in our institute. So the treatment modality, it can be divided as either conservative or surgical management. In conservative management, we can do expectant management, that is watchful waiting. Medical management, there are non-invasive methods, minimally invasive methods, and invasive methods. And these are all uterus preserving methods. In surgical methods, if it is a pedunculated submucous fibroid, we can do simple polypectomy. And if the patient wants preservation of uterus or fertility preservation, then we can do myomectomy, stereoscopic resection in cases of submucous fibroid. And the definitive management is hysterectomy, that is the removal of the uterus. So going through the management one by one, expectant management is usually done in asymptomatic fibroid or small fibroid with mild to moderate symptoms, and fibroids in many perimenopausal women, because these perimenopausal women will soon go into menopause, and after menopause these fibroids will, size of the fibroids will regress spontaneously, and hence the symptoms will also regress. The indications for interventions are infertility, if there is recurrent pregnancy loss, even if it is symptomatic, and if the size of the uterus is large enough and is abdominally palpable, then at that time also we need to intervene. If the patient has pressure symptoms like acute retention of urine, or there is the size of the uterus is growing rapidly, or even after menopause, or patient presenting with symptoms, severe symptoms that we have discussed earlier. So medical management of the fibroid uterus, the aim of medical management can be divided into two categories. One is temporary palliation, that is symptomatic relief, such as relief in symptoms such as menorrhagia, or a correction of anemia and decreasing the size of the fibroid tissue, or when we need to postpone the surgery and the patient is symptomatic, at that time also we give medical management for the time being. Or it can be used as alternative to surgery in cases of perimenopausal women or those who are unfit for the surgery. So the medicines that we can use for fibroid uterus are, there are various different groups of drugs. The first line of drug that we use for abnormal uterine bleeding to control menorrhagia is NSAIDs. The drug under this category is mefenamic acid. It acts by inhibition of prostaglandin synthesis and hence reduces dysmenorrhea. Similarly, antifibrinolytic drugs like tranexamic acid reduces the blood loss and corrects anemia. The other group of drugs, other groups of drugs, these two are the first line of drugs. And if the symptoms are not relieved with these drugs, then we go for hormonal therapies. In hormonal therapies, we have combined oral contraceptive pills, which decreases blood loss as well as fibroid growth, and it corrects anemia as well, because it has got 21, we have got 28 pills packet, where there is 21 hormonal pills and 7 tablets of iron. So that will correct anemia also. The other hormonal group of drug that can be used for fibroid uterus is progesterones. In progesterones, we have norethiosterone and medroxyprogesterone acetate. So these drugs, they inhibit insulin-like growth factor and as well as induces endometrial atrophy. By that, it causes reduction in the menstrual blood loss in 70% of the patient. In 30% of the patient, they develop amenorrhea, and there is a decrease in fibroid volume in 50% of case. The new drug, progesterone drug, that is being widely used nowadays is levonorgestrel intrauterine system. Running out of time, okay. That is intrauterine device, and it causes local progesterone action, reduces blood loss in 99% of cases, and uterine fibroid up to 40% of cases. So the other group of drug is antiprogestogen, that is mifepristone. It decreases the size of the fibroid. The other group of drugs are androgen agonists, that is danazol. Certain drugs like GnRH agonist and GnRH antagonist, these are the newer drugs. So I have not written the dose of these drugs because you do not need it. These are for empty label. And both GnRH agonist and antagonist, they act by pituitary down regulation of gonadotrophin productions. And these are mainly used during the for short interval of time for 3 months, 3 to 4 months, and after that the patient has during that period also, because of the down regulation of gonadotrophins, we need add back therapy. The newer drug that is emerging is selective progesterone receptor modulator, such as ulipristal and asoprisnil. They have the anti-proliferative effect on fibroid cells and endometrium, and also inhibits the ovulation. Aromatase inhibitors like letrozole, anastrozole has also been tried. There are other few drugs which are used, are under evaluation for fibroid uterus. So surgical management, indication for surgical management is if the patient has severe anemia, if there is a torsion of pedunculated fibroid, if the patient is having severe symptoms which compromises the quality of life, and if the size is large enough, that is more than 12 weeks size. So preoperatively, we need to correct anemia, we need to control menorrhagia, and correct the medical problems, medical comorbidities. So the surgical treatment that we have are myomectomy, that is the removal of the myoma only. So we do myomectomy if the patient has unexplained infertility with cavitary distortion, or unexplained recurrent pregnancy loss, or the patient wants fertility conservation, and in cases of subserosal pedunculated fibroid. So before going into the surgery, there are certain prerequisites that should be fulfilled. Because this is a very highly vascular surgery, and there is chances of blood loss. We need to correct anemia, and other causes of infertility should be ruled out. Sometimes while doing myomectomy, if there is excessive bleeding or if there is a formation of hematoma, we may proceed for hysterectomy. So always in a patient who is having a surgery for myomectomy, we should also take consent for hysterectomy if need arises. And it is better if we perform this surgery in pre-ovulatory menstrual cycle, because at that time the vascularity of the myoma is less, and we have to do endometrial biopsy to rule out endometrial carcinoma. So there are different routes of doing myomectomy. Vaginal, if it is a submucous fibroid, we can do vaginal myomectomy. Or hysteroscopic resection of the submucous myoma. Laparoscopically, also we can do myomectomy, and the other is open or abdominal myomectomy. The another surgical method that we do is the hysterectomy, and is the definitive treatment. Hysterectomy is done with or without salpingo-oophorectomy, depending on the age of the patient, and it can be done either through abdominal or laparoscopically. So there are newer therapies that are emerging in the management of fibroid uterus, which are minimally invasive or non-invasive methods. One of them is uterine artery embolization. This is a minimally invasive method and is done under fluoroscopic guidance, and it is done by intervention radiologist, where a small catheter is inserted to the femoral artery, and the catheter is inserted up to the uterine artery under fluoroscopic guidance through internal iliac artery. and they inject certain embolizing agents like polyvinyl alcohol or gel form to occlude the uterine vessels, uterine artery. So this will cause ischemia of the fibroid. So there will be no blood supply to the fibroid, that will result in ischemia, and the fibroid tissue will shrink down. Sometimes if it is a submucous or cervical fibroid, the patient may pass fibroid tissue vaginally also, and it is done under local anesthesia or intravenous anesthesia. So this is one of the emerging modality of treatment which will preserve the uterus and ovarian tissue. And it is by this procedure also there will be less duration of hospital stay and less complications as compared to abdominal hysterectomy. So other neotherapies that can be done and are under research are magnetic resonance guided focused ultrasound. So it is a non-invasive method where high ultrasound rays are given through abdominal wall under MRI guidance, and that will cause lysis of the fibroid tissue. But for this, the fibroid mass should be immediately beneath the abdominal wall. There should be no bowel interpositions or scar on the abdominal wall. The other methods are myolysis and radiofrequency ablation, which are under research. So to summarize today's lecture, fibroids are the most benign benign tumors of the female. Etiology is poorly understood. The symptoms of fibroid, they include heavy menstrual bleeding, bulk-related symptoms like pressure symptoms, and reproductive dysfunction. The diagnosis is mainly by clinical examination and imaging. Treatment of choice depends on the fibroid characteristics, symptoms, patient's age, and wish to preserve fertility. Thank you.